get this show started.
Cool.
Welcome, everybody, as we continue with our first ever Paganish Michigan Virtual Book Fest. Coming up next, we have T.S. Lamb with What is an Altar, which is a children's book. It is one in a series of children's books talking about basic issues in witchcraft and paganism in general. So without further ado, here is T.S. Lamb.
Hi there. I'm T.S. and I'm here to talk to you about What is an Altar, which is one of our books from the Pagan Children Learning Series, which is set up to be an introduction to paganism for young readers. So I'm actually the illustrator instead of the author, but she was not able to do it. We thought this was a pretty cool event, wanted to be included. So I'm going to try and read it and hold it up as well so you can see the illustrations, because it is actually a very short book. So here we go. So what is an altar? And we do actually start with a letter to the parents, which I'm going to go ahead and read just because we thought it was pretty important to have in all the books. So, when we embarked on the journey of creating this series, we asked ourselves many tough questions. How are we going to keep this as inclusive as possible? What is the best way to provide assistance to parents without offending or excluding? How can we show paganism as joyous and beneficial despite stereotypes that our faith is more dark than light? Our answer was this: we will try our best, and so we have. Of course, we understand that paganism is an umbrella term for a multitude of faiths, and that there are a plethora of faiths and beliefs held by practicing pagans. We have, as aforementioned, tried our best to represent an open, general idea of some pagan beliefs, and we apologize if we have missed anything that is important to you. If there is a topic that you would like to see covered in the series, please contact us, and within it you can go to our Facebook page or whatever. We purposely split the series up into smaller topics so that parents can more easily pick and choose which topics they want to present to their children. We have kept the topics simple so that you might expand with your own personal specifics. You'll find important terms in green italic font. Helpful ways to explain these terms are found in the glossary discussion at the back of the book. There's also a fun activity to engage your children after each topic discussion. As you'll find, these books are only an introduction for young readers and not meant to be a be-all, end-all. We hope to, in the future, create books that serve the same purpose for older children as well. We hope that you enjoy the series together with your children and use it to open discussions about your faith. Thank you from Rowan Moss and T.S. Lamb. Our dedications are from Rowan. We've got To Little Altars Everywhere. And for me, it's to S&E, who are my two favorite inspirations. So we've got, what is an altar? An altar is your very own sacred space. An altar is a place where you can focus and meditate. It is also a place where you can create rituals and spells. An altar can be a place of honor, to honor a deity, ancestors, or nature. There are many different reasons for creating an altar. Do you have an altar in your home? So, and then you can see the green words over there as well, and those tell you what's going to be in the glossary. Altars are used all over the world. They are created for many different religions and many different purposes. An altar can be very personal, and you can create it however you like. Everyone sets their altars up differently. Some people use altars, like to have tools for rituals on their altars. They might have an athame, a pentacle, a chalice, candles, incense, or other things. Each item will serve a purpose for the person using the altar. There are many different kinds of altars. Altars can be created inside or outside. They may be covered with a special cloth and decorated with items and tools. Or an altar can simply be a candle sitting on a table. What kind of an altar would you like to create? Sometimes an altar is created for a specific intent or ritual, and the altar is dismantled when the intent has been expressed or the ritual is over. Some people carry an altar with them at all times, and some people set up a permanent altar in their home. Others create altars all over their homes. Some people position their altars in specific directions or put them in a certain place. For instance, someone might set up an altar in their garden to honor nature or to honor an earth deity. People will often decorate their altar to celebrate holidays, times of year, or when they want to manifest something specific. For example, you might place a photo of a loved one surrounded by healing crystals if you are trying to manifest healing for them. You might place gourds or autumn leaves on an altar in celebration of Mabon. In many parts of the world, altars are built to honor a loved one who has passed away or to honor ancestors. Some of these altars are set up and tended to all year long. Others are created only for special occasions and holidays. It is never okay to touch someone else's altar without their permission. Remember, an altar is your sacred space, so another person's altar is their sacred space. It is important to remember to treat people in their sacred space with care and respect. The choice to create and tend an altar is very personal. How you decorate your altar is something that you can choose. Do you have an altar in your home? If your family has altars in their home, ask about it. And then we have a craft on how to create your own altar. So ask your family if they'd like to help you create an altar of your very own. And you will need a cleared space that's just for your altar, any adornments or items that you would like on your altar, cleansing tools, musical instruments, sage, whatever works for you. Step 1, search for the perfect spot for your altar. It's important that this space belongs to you and that your family knows that this is your space. It probably isn't a good idea to try and create an altar in your sister's sock drawer. Step 2, collect all the items you would like to have on your altar. Remember, this is your space, but feel free to ask your family what their traditions are. See our little friend creating his altar there. Step 3 is prepare your space. This is a good opportunity to ask your family what they do to prepare their sacred space. You can smudge the space with a sage stick with adult supervision, spray it with some smudging spray, or use musical instruments or noisemakers to move any negative energy out of the space. Step 4, set up your altar any way you like for whatever purpose you like. Step 5, bless or consecrate your altar in a way that feels good to you, or ask your family what their traditions are. Step 6, enjoy your altar and use it for whatever intention you created it for. And then we end with our glossary of terms here, which just talks about all the different words that we've highlighted within. And that is what is an altar. So thank you very much for listening to our story. We actually have, this is our 4th book in our series. We also have Who is a Witch? What is Magic? And what are the elements? And they're all created very much to make it as accessible to children of any age, but especially younger kids. So as you can see, it's all very short and as clean and clear as we can make it. And then each book, we're getting better about making sure we have more and more people and different types of paganism included. So not really sure. I can talk a little bit. I'm assuming there's no questions yet. So
not yet. But can you tell us a little bit about what led you guys into this project?
Sure. What led Rowan and I into doing this project is, oh gosh, I think we started talking about this project about 14 years ago now. 13, 14, something like that. We both had, well, I had my son, and I had been trying to come up with some way to teach him, because most paganism is aimed at adults. Partially because that seems to be when most people discover it. And also it's a lot easier to talk about with adults than it is to figure out how to talk about it with kids. Partially because there are areas where people can get in a lot of trouble socially if they're pagan, so they have to be very careful about how they discuss things. So trying to teach children terms in a way that they can learn, but in a way that is safe for them and their family is very difficult. Rowan was having similar thoughts at the time. I think she just had her son as well. And so we were both looking for some way to teach our children how to understand what we were doing and also to bring them in, because it didn't feel right to wait until they were teenagers to then, then bring them in. And so many events are set up for adults, and so many events exclude children very purposefully. A lot of covens, that's not what they're set up for, which is totally understandable. So what we were trying to do is figure out how to just that. How do we introduce young children to something, and how do we help parents do that? Because so many parents didn't have a way to do that. I certainly didn't have a way to do that. And Rowan didn't feel that she did either. So I have realized a long time ago that I am not a writer, but I've been an artist for a long time. And so while I had ideas, I needed somebody else who was better at putting them down. And Rowan had been working from the other angle in a similar way. She was very much a writer, but couldn't figure out how to illustrate things that would be attractive and bring kids' interest into the books. So that was how we got started. We started talking about it, and then I had worked with a friend who was a publisher on a different children's series. And so we were able to get her help in getting these set up and sent out and published the first 3. Since then, she has moved on to other stuff, and we have self-published, but we are still able to get them out there, which is very helpful. And each one we try and tackle one overarching concept and then take it into a simple way. The altars was a little interesting because there are so many different types of altars, and so many people use them in so many different ways that there was kind of, as we've gone in, it's gone from being intuitive books to a lot more research books to try and figure out how to include as much as possible, if that makes sense. So I think the first one we started with is Who is a Witch, which wasn't our original intent to start with, but we decided that this was good because this deals with so many of the stereotypes you get in what people think is a pagan. Because you tell somebody you're pagan, they're like, oh, you're a witch. Oh, you must be evil because media has shown us that witches are evil and green-skinned and they hurt people. So we started with that one because we really wanted to make it understandable that this was a term they're going to come across. And you come across witches being bad from day one. And so we really wanted to address that and figure out a good way to make you understand that they're everywhere and they're not bad. They're just people in your community. And so that really, with that being our first one, that started the illustration style, it started the book style, it started the how do we, you're always going to come across these terms, so let's do a glossary. Let's figure out how to make them accessible. So that's what we've worked on doing. So far it's been a lot of fun. We wish we could put out more. But we're working on new ones. But it's been a weird year, so we're a little behind.
I think that's understandable. It's been a tough year for everybody.
Yes. So since there's not any questions yet, I'm going to talk a little bit about what our other books talk about. So the second one we dealt with was What is Magic, which was one that was near to Rowan's heart because she studies, her path is more Wicca, and so magic comes up a lot more in Wicca. And so she really wanted to deal with, what are different ways that is a part of our life, that we can make it an everyday acceptable part of our life. We don't want it just to be something that we do on the Sabbaths or holidays or special occasions. We want it to be something you can kind of do and interact with in everyday life. And so this one became very much about that. And it was very much about, children working together to create that magic and to share it with each other, familial, friends. Also, a little bit about what we've started to do is try and figure out how do you introduce it to a friend that isn't pagan. And these books are set up to be good introductions for if you're pagan and raising your child, or if you are introducing it to your children's friends, or people that aren't pagan that might be interested in it. Our third book was What Are the Elements? And this was one that was close to my heart because we're much more nature-based We don't really follow a particular deity or a particular religious history, I guess. So it's much more intuitive, and it's much more what connects to us. So it's a lot more, talking to plants and animals, and ours is much more kind of conversation. But depending on the time of year, you might get, it's a very fire heavy time. So how would you talk to your kids about those elements and why that element is more pronounced at that time of year or with that ritual? So yeah.
I could see those books being really helpful in the context of a Spiral Scouts group or any kind of children's activities. Have you heard about any groups using your books for meetings or events?
We haven't yet, but we've done a couple of pagan festivals, and we will often read one of the books, usually whichever one is the newest out, and then we will try and do some activity that either relates to it or that will bring kids into it. So we do a lot of stuff with ribbons and stamps or painting, or how do you bring energy about or bring your space joy with bubbles or running around or singing, or it's always something that we're trying to develop. We did look at trying to come up with some kind of a children's event at Convocation some year doing what is an altar, and could we have boxes of random things for each of the elements and then say, hey kids, grab from whatever how would you create your altar if you had these elements, or you could put these tools on or whatever. Obviously stuff that's good for any, for smaller kids so they don't get hurt, but we still haven't quite figured out a good way to do it. And I know, so I listened to Janet's talk before mine and figuring out how to make things more inclusive. So we're always trying to, whenever we do an event, we always have some kind of kids activity because that's what we do. And we're always trying different things. Partially because our kids were so little when we started this. And now my son's 15 and my daughter's 11, and they still will pull out the books and talk about it, and they'll show it to their friends, and they'll say, oh, I want to go back and look at that altar one, and I want to see, I've got this stuff, I wonder if I can come up with an altar for it. So we've also found that it's good. It's because it's basic, it translates into older kids are happy to use it as well because it's a good starting point. Yeah, so yeah, whereas the current project is with the new books is to try and make sure that it's even more inclusive with people of color or disabilities. Because I think the first book, I got most of the way through the illustrations. I'm like, I'm mostly using my kids and their friends as references. It's like, I can need some more diverse people in here. So we've worked very hard, and we continue to work very hard to try and make it even more diverse than it was. So
I think it's awesome that your kids are finding it helpful in talking with their friends. It sounds like even as they're older, being able to pull those out. I know my own kids have had to have tough conversations with some of their friends trying to explain their path. So it's really cool that even as your kids get older, they're still finding those books helpful. We have an anonymous question over here. Says Iron Ritualist Junior Edition. I don't know if you're familiar with the Iron Ritualist workshops.
I am not.
They're a series that was started by Sapphire and Shadow Dragon and actually got handed off to me a couple of years ago, where we encourage people to think of ritual things on the spot with random bits of objects. One year it was the tool chest out of Shadow Dragon's truck. One year we went around and picked stuff up out of the vending hall, or said make a ritual out of what you've got in your pockets. So it sounds like your idea of having the kids build an altar would be similar to that.
Yeah, that's a fantastic idea. I have not heard about that, but I love it. So it's kind of an Iron Chef, but for rituals. That's fun. Anything that gets kids involved. I mean, I've done a lot of conventions, science fiction, fantasy conventions, and there's usually nothing for kids. And then Convocation, I know, will sometimes be better than others. They will sometimes have stuff. And I've done art shows as an artist, and then some of the pagan shows, and it's very hard to get stuff for kids. And we've had a hard time trying to come up with stuff because we want it to be as inclusive, but we also need it to fit in our vehicles. Which practical versus what you really want can sometimes be a difficult line to walk. But the other thing, we always encourage people to contact us. Our biggest thing currently is getting our social media stuff back up. Our website is back up, and we're trying to get some more blogs on it, especially with school starting. And then trying to get onto Instagram, which really is just proving I'm old. My kids keep coming down going, no, Mom, that's not how you do it. So trying to delegate. They haven't taken it over yet. So that's our biggest thing. And then we're trying to get, trying to start work on perhaps a garden inspired book for kids, because kids, at least mine, really like to have their fingers in the soil or run from bugs. Could go either way. So we're trying to figure out how we might do a garden book as a new one. Just, and how do you bring nature in when you're urban, or you're in an apartment, or you've got lots of space. There's a lot of different locales and different ways to handle it. So it's kind of what we're working on right now. We're talking about maybe doing some kind of a mascot for the site, and then have a naming contest for kids, because that's always kind of a fun thing. But a lot of it is just trying to figure out where we go, So kind of where we're at right now. Well, for me, the kids are going back to school, so we're trying to figure out, virtual learning, and hers is trying to finish up a degree and get that done. So kind of life keeps getting in the way of what we want to be doing, but it all adds fun to it.
So what do you think will be the next book you put out in this series?
We are looking at either, we've gone back and forth between trying to do a children's book of gardening, which we don't have a name for yet, or something on centering and grounding, because especially with the pandemic, and even just in my kids' experience with my kids, there's a lot more anxieties that kids are undergoing and feeling, and then the pandemic, what that's brought out. How do you center yourself? How do you ground yourself as a kid? How do you do it when you're at school in a classroom? How do you do it when you're on the playground? How do you do it when you just have those emotions that are trying to get out? So those are the two that keep coming to the forefront as what we're contemplating. We haven't gotten either of them written yet. We're trying to figure out how to address those, because they're both pretty big topics. And our books are it's taking the big topics and trying to make them accessible. So once we've figured that out, our goal is to try and get something new out this summer. So that's our hope. We talked about earlier, but trying can take a lot of time. So usually it's good if I can get on a roll, then it goes much faster, but then we've got editing and layout. So the summer is the hope for our next project. And we're hoping it'll be one of those two, but you never know, it could end up with something else. So if you've got something you really, really want to see addressed, that's good too, because we're just two people in a world that there's a lot of options and a lot of things people want to know about, and a lot of stuff that maybe we haven't thought about yet. So we're always looking for new ideas too, and stuff people like. So those are the two we're contemplating.
So what is your website again?
PaganChildren'sLearningSeries.com. And if you type in Pagan Children Learning, quite often it'll come up in Google. That is also our Facebook page. paganchildrenlearningseries.com. And on Instagram, we are PCLS Books. We have been trying to make it so we are posting at least once a week. And as we get into getting some more blogs up there and cleaning up our website, we are hoping to increase that. But we figure if we start with one a week, we can at least keep something going.
Awesome. Sharing the links in the comments over here. Do you want to read a bit of one of the other books in the series?
Yeah, you know, why don't I do What is a Witch? Because that was our first one that kind of got us all started. So who is a witch? And I'm not going to read the letter to parents because it's exactly the same. So, who is a witch? A witch is a person who practices magic. So I just want to point out, in the illustrations, you're going to notice that there's some black and white and some color. And the idea with the illustrations is that the people in color are the witches. They're the ones that bring a variety and a freshness and color to our world, and that we don't always notice them. So like something like this, where you see the bicyclist, he's in color, and where he's moving is in color, but the rest of the people around him are in black and white. So it was just kind of a fun way to illustrate that without that variety of every type of person being in it, our world would be a lot duller. Who can be a witch? Anyone can be a witch. Your mail carrier, teacher, your neighbor, even the lady at the supermarket. They can have red hair, brown hair, blonde hair, or blue. You can't always tell someone's a witch by how they appear. You might have a witch in your school, your neighborhood, or your own family. What do witches do? Well, witches do the same things that you do. They play games, watch TV, go to school, wash the dishes. We've got a couple of kids playing some games there. Then what makes witches different? Witches practice magic to create, protect, cleanse, heal, and other things. Many witches keep a garden. Sometimes they grow food, herbs for cooking and healing, beautiful flowers for practicing magic, or just to enjoy looking at. Some witches participate in large rituals with a group of other witches called a coven. Some witches practice magic by themselves in their own home and yard. Some might practice with their family. Some witches use spells, stones, incense, and wands. Some witches don't use anything at all. Some witches perform magic in the kitchen with herbs, flowers, and incantations. Other witches prefer to practice magic outside under the sun or moon. Some people are afraid of witches. They think that witches are ugly, scary, or mean. Some are afraid that a witch might turn them into a toad. But witches aren't scary. They're people just like you and me. They might even have one in your family or your neighborhood. Some witches can be extremely helpful. They can comfort, heal, and cleanse. There are definitely not people to be afraid of. So what should you do if you meet a witch? Just smile, wave, and say merry meet. And then in this one, we have a craft for making wild animal treats. So many witches love being kind to nature and all the living creatures who live in the wild. Here's a way for you to be kind to some of the creatures who live near your home. You will need pine cones, preferably collected from outside, not scented or lacquered. String, a spatula, peanut butter, birdseed, adult supervision. Tie the string around the pine cone. Spread the birdseed onto the baking sheet or put it into a bowl. Using the spatula, spread the peanut butter all over the pine cone filling in all of the nooks and crannies. Roll the peanut butter covered pine cone in the birdseed until it is completely covered. Securely hang the pine cone from a tree branch or other place where the birds, squirrels, and other wild animals can reach it. And sit at the window and watch the critters enjoy their treat. Of course, you always come up with the issue that sometimes people are allergic to peanut butter. There's lots of other things you can use too. There's shortening, greases. You can use glue as long as it's pretty healthy. The school glues are usually a little more healthy, and so when the creatures get it, it's not usually too bad for them. So, but you can find some other options too. But so all of our books have a story, a letter to parents, a craft, and a glossary. But that was our first one, so that's kind of the one closest to our heart.
That's awesome. My youngest is still right around the target stage of development for those books, and he was in here cuddling the cat and listening and kind of talking back at you. He didn't know you couldn't hear him.
Oh no, I'm so sorry I couldn't hear him. That's wonderful. I'm glad he enjoyed them. Well, any advice he has too or would like to see included in a book, we're all ears.
He'd probably say add cats.
You just got to go through them. There's a lot of cats in these books because I have a lot of cats. So they wander in just like my kids do. Well, I think my time's about up, isn't it?
We've got 10-ish minutes left. If there's any other projects you'd like to share that you're working on?
Well, I know Rowan has been working on some different stuff for school, and we're looking at trying to get more blogs up. We've been trying to do some kind of a coloring book or activity book for kids. And then we've also got like a workbook we've worked on before and we're trying to redo, which you can download, and will be good for how do you create rituals or a practice at home with your family. And it's kind of a workbook philosophy. So we're still refining it to see what the best way to do it. Part of our problem is because there are so many different ways to do rituals or celebrate Sabbaths, we try very hard not to give ideas and guidelines and not, you should do it this way. So a little bit of what we're working on is trying to figure out how to express stuff that's open but still in a guiding way, because a lot of times, I know for me especially, I don't do a lot of rituals with my kids. It's very much little everyday rituals for us. So we've talked about how to develop those some more, and then how to help give guidelines to other people. So that's kind of what we're working on right now. And then trying to get more blog posts in, especially as we come into school, which is in a very different situation than it's been before. And some people are able to be virtual, so there might be ways for their kids to be able to create rituals that help them through that anxiety of trying to figure out how, if you get behind, if you don't get behind, if you don't understand, if you don't want to sit still, how can those help? So that's a lot of it. And then personally, I've started a comic book trying to talk about my husband's. He has some medical issues, so trying to come and illustrate those to help other people understand more what it's like. So some of that styling kind of fits into that, gets talked about. So, and of course, there's always projects outside of what you're, the book you're working on, right? So yeah. That's the biggest thing we're working on, is trying to figure out how to connect even more with people that would like to, and to see how much more we can help and how many different ways we can make new stuff accessible.
So I shared the links over here, and I will also share them in the Facebook event when we're done, and encourage everybody to definitely get in touch with you and let you guys know what they're thinking of, or if they're looking for anything new.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thank you for joining us. It's been wonderful having you and getting a chance to see those books. I know I'm going to be ordering some.
Yes, they're lovely. They're available. So
anything that my youngest will listen to gets our attention, that's for sure.
They're pretty good books. We've found all the kids we've read it to have always really liked it. So it's very nice for us to hear too, because it means we're doing it right.
Awesome. We still have 10 minutes here. We can hang out if anybody has any other questions they'd like to share.
So, one of the things we're working on is trying to figure out, like Janet was talking before, how do you bring more disabilities into the books so that they're talked about? I'm working on trying to figure out how to make them more visually there. We've started adding in more just kids that maybe you'll see somebody in a wheelchair, definitely trying to make sure we have diverse coloring. And one of the things I've been trying to figure out is how do you bring in things or make it accessible for people who are deaf? I have a friend that works with deaf, so I'm trying to talk to her to figure out how we can illustrate that. 'Cause some things are just very hard to illustrate, but sometimes there are keys that people of that group might recognize. So a lot of it's just becoming even more aware of what's going on, especially with everything that's going on these days. How do you make it even better? So we're always looking for advice and people who might not see themselves represented in the books that would like to. We would love to work with anybody who can help us bring in some more of that diversity, because obviously you draw what you know and you write about what you know, and I don't know.
A lot of us don't know what we don't have experience with. I know as a wife and parent of the blind community, I'd be saying, have you considered making a tactile book or something along those lines?
Yes. The only reason we haven't so far is how we don't know how to. I know how we could build it. I don't know how we could get it into manufacturing. Same with how could we do it where it would have Braille, because that would be really good if we could do a book in Braille. Obviously, the illustrations aren't going to come across as well, but there are ways to illustrate that as well. And learning more about that and figuring out how to do that. That's probably something that will, as we talk to more publishers or try different ways to get them published, that might be something we can pursue. Another thing is I'd like to talk to more people whose kids might be autistic or have, to make sure that we're accessible to them, because I want to make sure that the language is good and the pictures are good and come through as well. Because there just is so much out there that we want to make sure everybody has a resource. And they might not all be the same resource, but we want to make sure everybody has as much as possible. So because the world's pretty cool.
That is awesome. We do have one question asking if you write stories about familiars.
We haven't yet, but we have talked about it. One of the things with kind of coming up with a mascot is, could it be like a familiar for the series? And could it be something that is maybe a hidden thing throughout the series that you look into? So it's something that we've just started talking about doing, and we haven't quite figured out the best way to do it without, because having books about familiars is different than an informative book. They can relate, but we haven't figured out how to make them work together yet.
I could see, what is it? There's a, I don't remember if it's the Usborne books, but there's a series of books where they hide a mouse on every page, and you've got to find the mouse. And I think we got a Braille copy of one of those in one of our book boxes, and they put a little Braille M over the mouse, so the blind kids could go find the mouse too, which is awesome.
That's great. There are a couple of series of books that do that. The Mercer Mayer has often a little spider in it, and he'll be hidden throughout the images or down by the number for the page. I think the Usborne books are, if you give a mouse a cookie, that series will often have a little mouse, and that'll continue through the series. So there are a lot of they're starting to include that more, because then also if the kids are reading it, over and over again, it gives them an added dimension to bring them into the story and to the book. If we did a little familiar, so that's kind of what we were talking about. We've talked about a wombat. We've talked about maybe badgers, ferrets. What's a fun little animal that hasn't been used or hasn't gotten its love? You know, so so that's the kind of what it comes down to is, can I draw one over and over again that is still fun but doesn't look like somebody else's? Which just gets into technical, which is not fun. Know if we had any other questions.
I'm not seeing any other questions at the moment. So thank you very much for joining us today. This has been a lot of fun, and I hope everybody else enjoyed it. I'm going to post a link here to our next presenter coming up at 1 o'clock Eastern is Belladonna Laveau, and you can join her by clicking on that link. But in the meantime, we'll take a bio break, as we say online, and see everybody back. Thank you so much, T.S. Lamb, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.